Be prepared. While you may not be aware of it, you're part of something only a few are chosen for, and it's about to change how you see everything. You didn't click this video by accident. You were pulled here, because the moment the seventh seal begins to trigger, it doesn't call the masses. It calls the one person whose life is about to shift in a way they can feel but can't explain. The seventh seal is opening in you, and if you don't realize what that means, you could miss the biggest turning point of your entire life. If you're here right now, it's because the prophecy has finally reached your timeline. You felt this moment building long before you could put words to it. You weren't confused, you were early. Spiritually attuned people don't feel lost because something is wrong with them. They feel lost because they're living in a world that hasn't caught up yet. That strange sense that you don't belong was recognition. Your soul recognized the seals long before your mind did. You were born remembering something you couldn't name, a truth buried so deep inside you that it followed you into adulthood like a shadow. And now, you're finally standing in the moment where that nameless feeling becomes clear. You weren't imagining it. You weren't wrong. You were one of the few who remembered before the world was ready. And if that finally makes sense, it's because you truly align with the seventh seal. And that means you need to be aware of what it really signifies. Seven isn't an ending. 7 is when everything finally lines up. Most people hear 7 and think of finality, but spiritually, the number has never meant collapse. It represents the moment something completes its cycle because its purpose is fulfilled, not because it failed. 7 is the point where the old chapter closes with dignity, not destruction, and the new one begins because you're finally ready to handle it. Think of it like this. 7 is alignment. Body, spirit, intuition, destiny, timing, purpose, and will, all finally moving in the same direction instead of pulling you apart. It's the first time in your life where the things you feel internally begin matching the life you're meant to live externally. This is why the 7th seal matters more than any other. It doesn't activate chaos, it activates recognition. It's the stage where destiny finally looks at you and sees someone who can hold what they've been asking for. People think destiny arrives when they're perfect, but the real truth is, destiny arrives the moment you stop running from who you are. The 7th seal is the moment you cross that invisible bridge between who you've been and who you're becoming. It's the quiet threshold where everything in your life starts pointing in the same direction, not by chance, but because you've reached the frequency of your own future. And if you've made it this far, there's a reason. You wouldn't feel this seal opening if something inside you wasn't finally aligning in a way it never has before. But there's an even deeper reason why this awakening doesn't happen for everyone, and it has everything to do with the road you've walked to get here. You weren't being punished, you were being prepared. The 7th seal doesn't awaken in people whose lives were easy. It awakens in the ones who had to rebuild themselves more times than they can count. Every setback you went through, every moment where you felt overlooked, every season where you carried more than you could explain, wasn't wasted. It was groundwork. It was shaping you into someone strong enough to carry what's coming next. This is the part most people miss. The seal only opens for those who have already done the inner work without even realizing it. The isolation, the confusion, the moments where you felt like life was holding you underwater. All of that was planting season. You weren't breaking. You were being planted so you could rise differently. Pressure doesn't destroy the chosen ones, it reveals them. The 7th seal awakens in those who didn't give up, when it would have been easier to quit. In those who kept going despite having every reason to walk away. In those who transformed pain into depth and silence into understanding. And because you've endured that hidden season, you're standing in the one moment where everything is about to shift from internal to external, from preparation to purpose. What comes next isn't another trial. It's the release that only a few people ever reach. And once you understand what this release actually means for your future, everything about your path will start to make sense. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming the person you were always meant to grow into. The seventh seal marks the moment in someone's life where they finally step into the version of themselves they spent years searching for. Not the idealized version, not the fantasy self, but the grounded, wiser, calmer, more capable self your younger self always hoped you would become. This prophecy isn't describing a supernatural transformation. It's pointing to a very real moment where your past stops controlling your future. It's the moment where the version of you shaped by survival finally gives way to the version shaped by purpose. And the truth is, you've been inching toward this moment for years without even realizing it. Every experience that felt like it was breaking you was actually carving out the emotional depth, awareness, and resilience you needed to step into this level. There's a reason you handle things differently now. You notice patterns faster. You walk away from situations that used to pull you in. You see people more clearly, not because you've become cold, but because you finally learned to read what's really in front of you. That's the difference between a wounded self and an elevated self. One reacts, the other understands. This is the moment where you become the person who breaks cycles instead of repeating them. The person who creates clarity instead of chaos. The person who can stand in a room and hold space without even trying. Your younger self didn't need someone perfect. They needed someone who was aware, stable, and strong enough to guide them. And that's who you're becoming now. One of the deepest truths of this prophecy is that growth doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for honesty. And the more honest you've become with yourself, the closer you've moved toward the person you were always meant to evolve into. The seventh seal recognizes that evolution. That's why it opens in your lifetime, in this moment, and not earlier. You weren't late, you were ripening. And now, you're stepping into the identity you once prayed for without even knowing it. Some people wake up because the world calls them. Others wake up because their soul refuses to stay asleep. The seventh seal isn't just about personal awakening, it marks the beginning of a collective rise. A wave of people who were never meant to fit into the world as it was because they were built for the world that's coming next. These are the hidden ones, the people who grew up feeling different for reasons they couldn't explain, who carried an inner knowing that didn't match their environment, who sensed truth long before it was spoken. They aren't followers. They don't mirror trends. They move with an inner compass that stays steady even when the world spins. Hidden ones carry a kind of spiritual intelligence that can't be taught. It's encoded. And when the seventh seal begins to open, these people start to find each other without even trying. There's a kind of recognition, a sense of familiarity, like meeting someone you haven't seen in lifetimes. You've probably experienced it already, walking into a room and feeling the entire atmosphere shift, even though you said nothing. Or speaking a simple truth and watching someone's illusion collapse from the inside out. Hidden ones carry presence, and that presence becomes impossible to ignore once the seal begins to activate. This rise has nothing to do with hierarchy or superiority. It's about timing. For years, These souls moved quietly, observing, learning, absorbing, healing, and refining themselves in shadows where nobody noticed. But hidden seasons don't last forever. This prophecy marks the moment where what was kept in the dark starts stepping into its rightful visibility. Some lives begin the moment you stop shrinking to fit a world that was never built for your soul. That's what this activation is. It's the moment where the hidden ones stop hiding, not out of ego, but because their presence is needed, because their voice is needed, because their energy is needed. And you're not just part of this rise, you're one of the ones who triggers it. Which is why the timing of this awakening is so precise. It's no longer just about who you're becoming. It's about the impact you're about to have on the world around you. When alignment begins, delay ends. The moment the seventh seal opens, something shifts in the pace of your life. Things that once felt stuck or impossibly slow suddenly begin moving with a sense of urgency, almost as if the universe finally realized it's running behind schedule. This is the transition from waiting to acceleration, and it's one of the clearest signs that the prophecy is no longer symbolic. It's active. For years, you may have felt like you were walking through mud. You were doing the inner work, you were trying to evolve, you were trying to make sense of your direction, yet every step felt heavier than it should have been. That wasn't failure, it was preparation. It was your life, slowing down just enough for you to become conscious of yourself, your patterns, your choices, and what you truly want. The seal doesn't open during chaos. It opens the moment you're stable enough to handle momentum. And once it opens, momentum is exactly what you get. You'll notice that opportunities begin appearing almost out of nowhere, not random, but perfectly timed. People you were supposed to meet find their way into your orbit without effort. Solutions show up for problems that have been hanging over your head for years. Even your inner clarity sharpens. Decisions that used to feel agonizing suddenly feel obvious. The drag disappears, the fog lifts, and the direction becomes unmistakable. This acceleration isn't chaotic, it's intentional. It's life rearranging itself to match the person you've become. When destiny sees that someone is finally aligned internally, it stops testing and starts delivering. That's why you may feel like things are happening faster than you can process. You're stepping into a chapter where the timing aligns with who you are, not who you used to be. One of the most powerful truths of this stage is that life doesn't reward speed, it rewards alignment. Now that you're aligned, everything that was being held back begins to surge forward. Not because you forced it, but because you're finally ready for it. The seal breaks and the acceleration begins. What feels broken is actually being rebuilt around your potential. Right before everything falls into place, it often feels like everything is falling apart. This is the part that confuses most people. They think something is wrong with their life, when in reality, their life is being reorganized at the deepest level. The prophecy of the seventh seal isn't about destruction or chaos, it's about restructuring. And restructuring can feel messy even when it's purposeful. Think of your life like a room that's being completely rearranged. When you walk in during the middle of the process, it looks worse than when you started. Furniture is out of place, objects are stacked where they don't belong, the flow is disrupted, and nothing seems to make sense. But that mess isn't disorder, it's transition. It's the in-between phase where everything is being moved so it can finally sit where it was meant to be all along. That's what's happening in your life right now. People may be leaving or entering unexpectedly. Opportunities may appear at strange times. Old interests may feel empty, while new passions ignite without warning. Emotions surface in odd ways, and events unfold with a rhythm you didn't ask for. It feels like nothing is where it belongs, but that's because it isn't supposed to be where it was before. Your life is being resorted to match your true timeline. The timeline that reflects your growth. The timeline that aligns with your potential. The timeline that your younger self always hoped you would one day reach. This stage is dramatic, yes, but it's incredibly hopeful. It means the old architecture of your life is being dismantled so the new structure can fit who you've become. What used to define you no longer applies. What used to limit you no longer sticks. What used to drain you no longer gets access. The seventh seal doesn't create chaos. It reveals what no longer fits, so it can be removed. And once the rearrangement settles, the clarity and direction that follow feel almost surreal. You realize the mess wasn't an ending. It was the blueprint of the life you're stepping into. Your life isn't out of order. It's outgrowing its old order. Readiness doesn't happen when life calms down. It happens when you do. People often wait for a moment where everything finally feels stable, quiet, aligned, and peaceful before they declare themselves ready for a new chapter. But spiritual readiness rarely comes wrapped in calm. More often, it shows up disguised as exhaustion, frustration, or that strange inner certainty that you cannot keep living the way you've been living. The seventh seal doesn't open when someone has perfected every part of themselves. It opens when someone has finally stopped pretending. When they get honest about what they want, what they're done tolerating, and who they're willing to become. You were being shaped for this long before you realized it. Every difficult season you walked through changed you in ways you didn't fully understand at the time. You carried yourself through moments that would have broken a weaker version of you. You learned how to sit with truths that weren't comfortable, but were necessary. You started recognizing patterns in yourself that you weren't ready to confront in the past. Those realizations weren't random breakthroughs. They were signs that your inner world was maturing faster than you gave yourself credit for. There were periods where you thought you were stuck, but you were evolving internally in a way that wasn't visible yet. There were moments where you felt lost, but something in you was quietly positioning itself toward a future that didn't match your past. You changed your mindset without announcing it. You shifted your boundaries without explaining it. You began outgrowing old versions of yourself without even realizing it. That's why the seal opens now, because you've reached a point where you're too aware to return to who you used to be. The most powerful part of this prophecy is that it doesn't require a flawless person, it requires a willing one. Someone who refuses to lie to themselves anymore. Someone who can finally say, I'm not who I once was, and I'm not apologizing for that. That honesty is what signals destiny. That honesty is what calls the seal to open. You didn't need to feel ready. You needed to become real. And you did. The remarkable thing is that your soul knew you were ready long before your mind did. You kept moving forward when you didn't feel strong. You kept growing when nobody saw it. You kept evolving even in silence. That's why this awakening meets you here, in this moment. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because you became someone capable of rising through whatever comes next. Your greatest preparation was becoming someone your future can trust. And now, the chapter that once felt too big for you is becoming the one that finally fits. You're not stepping into power. You're stepping into the version of yourself that earned it. Spiritual authority is one of the most misunderstood parts of awakening. It isn't loud. It isn't aggressive. It isn't tied to being perfect, enlightened, or endlessly patient. It's something a person grows into after they've walked through enough life to recognize their own strength without needing anyone to validate it. The seventh seal doesn't just reveal your identity, it reveals your authority, the inner power that comes from every experience that shaped you into who you are now. Think about how different you are today compared to the person you were in your hardest years. Back then, everything felt bigger than you. Situations felt overwhelming. People could easily manipulate your emotions, and uncertainty felt like a threat. But the person you are now, you see through things that used to confuse you. You sense energy shifts before they happen. You understand your own boundaries, your own needs, your own direction in ways that would have shocked your past self. That shift didn't happen by accident. It was forged in moments where you were pushed past your limits, not because the universe wanted to punish you, but because you were being shaped into someone who could hold more than you ever imagined. Pain carved out capacity, pressure carved out clarity, endurance carved out certainty. You didn't just survive your past, you absorbed its lessons so deeply that they transformed the way you move through the world. This is why the battles that once intimidated you no longer have the same effect. You face challenges with a kind of internal stability that can't be faked. You don't panic in situations where the old you would have unraveled. You don't cling to people who drain you. You don't fall apart the moment something unexpected happens. You have a presence now, quiet, grounded, and unmistakable, that comes from truly knowing yourself. One of the deepest truths of this stage is that power doesn't return when life becomes easier. Power returns when you stop abandoning yourself. And over time, without even noticing the shift happening, you stopped abandoning your intuition. You stopped abandoning your inner voice. You stopped shrinking to fit people who weren't meant to understand you. That's spiritual authority, the moment your energy stops negotiating with things that don't align with your growth. You're walking into a new era where your presence alone changes situations. Not because you're forcing anything, but because your frequency no longer bends under pressure. People feel it. Opportunities feel it. Even your challenges recognize it. You're not the person you used to be. You've stepped into a version of yourself that commands a different response from the world. This rise in authority isn't the reward, it's the result, the natural outcome of becoming someone who knows who they are and refuses to forget it again. And this is only the beginning of what the seventh seal is unlocking for you. You're not witnessing the prophecy, you are fulfilling it. There comes a point in someone's spiritual evolution where the entire narrative shifts. Instead of looking outward for meaning, signs, warnings, or revelations, they begin to recognize that the real landscape is happening inside them. Ancient prophecies weren't always describing cataclysms in the sky or catastrophic endings. Many of them were metaphorical reflections of what happens inside the person who is chosen to break the cycles that have echoed through their bloodline for generations. And this is where it becomes personal. The seventh seal has been spoken about as the final moment, the great reveal, the shift of ages. But what if the true revelation wasn't some external event waiting to unfold? What if the real revelation was you reaching the point where the old patterns that once ruled your life no longer have authority over you? What if the seal breaks the moment you break the cycle? Because when you look closely, the descriptions always hinted at a transformation that begins internally before anything shifts externally. Maybe, and this is a possibility worth sitting with, maybe the seventh seal was never meant to be understood as something the world would experience at once, but something that would awaken inside a specific kind of soul. A soul who has lived through the same emotional loops that generations before them couldn't escape. A soul who carries the echoes of unfinished stories but refuses to repeat them. A soul who realizes that their life isn't simply unfolding, it's correcting. You've been dealing with patterns that didn't start with you, yet they seem determined to run through you. The insecurities you faced weren't entirely yours. The fears you had to confront didn't originate with your experiences. The emotional weight you carried wasn't just your burden, it was inherited. And the moment you decided you weren't going to pass those patterns forward, something shifted at a level you might not have fully recognized until now. Cycles end through awareness, not force. They end through the courage to see clearly, not through perfection. The moment you began to question the path you were handed, you stepped outside it. The moment you developed the self-awareness your ancestors didn't have the luxury to develop, the cycle cracked. The moment you chose reflection instead of reaction, the seal loosened. Slowly at first, then all at once. That's why your life feels different right now, because something ancient is completing itself within you. Every prophecy ends when the one destined to break it finally wakes up to their own power. You are not just someone reading about the seventh seal. You are someone living the inner transformation that the prophecy was pointing toward. You are the interruption in the generational storyline. You are the one who ends what others felt trapped inside. And by doing so, you become the fulfillment of something much larger than your personal story. You become the point where the old thread snaps and a new one begins. This is the unveiling, realizing that the prophecy was never about the end of the world, but the end of a world inside you. And the moment that world ends is the moment your true life, the one you were meant to inherit, finally begins. What flows to you is meant to move through you, not to be trapped inside you. When someone reaches this point of awakening, when the internal cycle breaks and a new chapter begins aligning itself around them, the universe doesn't simply congratulate them and move on. Instead, something subtle but profound happens. They become a vessel, not in the sense of carrying others' burdens or taking responsibility for their healing, but in the sense of becoming a channel through which clarity, strength, and truth naturally flow. You may have noticed that ever since you started changing, the people around you respond differently. Without trying, you bring calm into chaotic spaces. Without forcing it, you offer understanding that others struggle to find within themselves. Without intending to, you reflect back a level of honesty that encourages others to shed illusions. You don't do any of this consciously. It happens because of who you've become. Transformation always leaves a signature, and the people connected to you feel it even when they don't understand it. As the prophecy fulfills itself within you, you begin carrying a presence that shifts the emotional gravity of whatever space you enter. People don't just hear your words, they feel the integrity behind them. Personal interactions become more honest, deeper connections start forming naturally, and you begin to attract individuals who are also waking up to their own inner transformations. This is because your energy is no longer a closed loop. It's a pathway. Being a vessel of release means you've learned to let experiences move through you without getting stuck. If you're still watching, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed the content and want to see more, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Your support is very appreciated. Feel free to share your experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and subscribe for more insightful content.